Mia Park had always been someone who thrived on solitude. As an artist, she found inspiration in quiet, open spaces where her thoughts could flow freely and transform into vivid paintings. After years of living in a crowded city, surrounded by noise and endless distractions, she finally saved enough to move to the suburbs. Her new home was everything she had dreamed of: a quaint bungalow surrounded by towering oaks, with a long private driveway that curved elegantly toward her front door. To Mia, the driveway was more than just a path for cars. It was the entrance to her sanctuary, a space she planned to decorate with sculptures and flowers, making it an extension of her creative vision. The move was her fresh start. It wasn't just about finding a new place to live, it was about escaping the chaos of her previous life, where neighbors were too close, noise was constant, and privacy felt like a luxury. Now she could finally focus on her art and herself. She spent her first week unpacking boxes, rearranging furniture, and envisioning how her studio would look once it was filled with her supplies. The house felt like a blank canvas waiting for her to fill it with life. Mia's first encounters with her neighbors were pleasant enough, though brief. Most greeted her with polite smiles and casual waves, but one woman stood out immediately: Karen Taylor, who lived in the large house next door. Karen introduced herself on Mia's second day, walking over with a plate of cookies and a wide, almost too perfect smile. "Welcome to the neighborhood," Karen had exclaimed, her voice dripping with a friendliness that somehow felt forced. "It's such a lovely area, don't you think? I'm sure you'll fit right in." Mia had thanked her, trying to overlook the subtle way Karen's eyes lingered on her driveway and the bushes that lined it. The conversation ended quickly, with Mia retreating inside, already feeling a slight discomfort she couldn't quite place. It wasn't long before the first issue arose. On a sunny afternoon, Mia noticed a silver SUV parked halfway up her driveway. At first, she thought it might belong to one of the workers finishing some last-minute repairs on the house, but when she went outside, she saw Karen chatting with a man near the vehicle. They seemed to be saying their goodbyes, and Karen was gesturing casually toward the SUV. Mia hesitated before walking over. "Hi, Karen," Mia called out, her tone polite but curious. "Is that your car in the driveway?" Karen turned, her smile as wide as ever. "Oh yes, sorry about that. My friend needed somewhere to park for a minute. Your driveway is so convenient, with how it's right there by the street." Mia paused, unsure how to respond. "Well, it's private property. I'd prefer if it wasn't used for parking." Karen's smile faltered slightly but returned just as quickly. Of course. I didn't think it'd be a big deal. The previous owner never minded." The comment struck Mia as odd. She hadn't met the previous owner, but she doubted they had given Karen free rein over the driveway. "I'd really appreciate it if you didn't park here again," Mia said firmly, though still trying to maintain a friendly tone. Karen nodded, her expression unreadable. "Absolutely. I'll let my friends know." Mia thought that would be the end of it, but over the next few days she noticed more cars appearing in her driveway, different makes and models, always parked for hours at a time. Each time she'd either see Karen or one of her guests wandering back toward the neighbor's house as if nothing were wrong. Mia tried addressing it again, stopping Karen one afternoon as she was collecting mail. "Karen, I've noticed cars parked in my driveway again," Mia said, her frustration starting to show. Karen sighed, her friendly demeanor beginning to crack. "Look, Mia, I understand you're new here, but we've always shared spaces in this neighborhood. It's not like anyone's hurting anything. It's private property," Mia replied firmly. "I need you to respect that." Karen's face tightened, and for the first time, her tone carried a hint of sharpness. "You're being awfully territorial about a little stretch of pavement. It's just a driveway." Mia stood her ground, repeating her request before walking away, heart pounding. She tried to shake off the unease, but the next morning, she found fresh tire marks cutting through the edge of her driveway and into the grass. The realization hit her hard. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. Karen was testing her, seeing how far she could push. Determined not to let her boundaries be ignored, Mia decided to take action. She ordered private property signs online and placed them at the edge of her driveway, hoping it would send a clear message. For a day or two, the driveway stayed clear, and Mia allowed herself to feel a small sense of victory. That feeling didn't last long. One evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, Mia stepped outside to water her plants and found the signs lying face down in the dirt, one of them bent as if someone had deliberately stomped on it. Her stomach churned with frustration. She glanced over at Karen's house, where laughter and voices spilled out from the backyard. This time, Mia didn't approach Karen. Instead, she decided to document everything. She took photos of the damaged signs and the tire marks, saving them on her phone. Her next step would be to consult her property deed and ensure there was no possible argument about the driveway's ownership. If Karen wanted a fight, Mia wasn't going to back down. What had started as a small annoyance was beginning to feel like a calculated challenge. Karen's behavior wasn't just about convenience, it was about control. And Mia realized she was dealing with someone who wouldn't stop until she was forced to. A few days passed without incident, and Mia started to believe that maybe, just maybe, the issue with Karen had been resolved. The driveway remained clear, and the sense of peace Mia had hoped to find in her new home seemed to settle over her once again. She spent her time working on sketches for a new art series, inspired by the oak trees surrounding her property. The tranquil environment finally allowed her to think clearly, and for a brief moment it felt like the move had been the right decision. But the calm didn't last long. One afternoon, Mia returned from a grocery trip to find her driveway packed with cars, at least 5 vehicles lined up from the street to her garage. She had to stop her car at the end of the driveway and sit there, staring in disbelief. It wasn't just that they were blocking her way, the cars were carelessly parked, their tires cutting deep into the edges of her lawn, leaving grooves in the soft soil. Bags of mulch she had left near the driveway for a gardening project were knocked over, the contents spilling out across the grass. Mia parked on the street and stormed toward her house, heart pounding with anger. As she approached the driveway, she recognized a few of the vehicles. They were the same ones she'd seen Karen's guests use before. Her frustration boiled over as she walked straight to Karen's house and rang the doorbell. It took a minute before Karen opened the door, her face lighting up in what seemed like feigned surprise. "Mia." "Hi," Karen said, her voice overly cheerful. "What brings you over?" Mia took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice calm. "Karen, there are 5 cars parked in my driveway right now, and they're blocking me from even getting to my garage. I need them moved immediately." Karen glanced toward the driveway, barely concealing a smirk. "Oh, are those my guests? I didn't realize they'd parked there again. I'll tell them to move in just a bit. We're having a small gathering, and parking's tight, you know how it is." Mia clenched her fists, her patience wearing thin. "This isn't the first time this has happened. I've asked you before to respect my property, but it keeps happening. I need this to stop." Karen's smile didn't waver, but her tone grew cooler. "Well, Mia, we're neighbors, and neighbors are supposed to help each other out. You've got such a long driveway, and it's not like you're using all of it at the moment. It's just parking. No harm done." "Harm is being done," Mia shot back. "Your guests are damaging my property. They've ruined my lawn and knocked over my supplies. This is not up for debate. I need the cars gone now." Karen's expression shifted slightly, the pleasant mask slipping just enough for a flicker of irritation to show. "Fine," she said curtly. "I'll tell them to move. But honestly, Mia, you don't have to be so uptight about a few cars. You're new here. Things are a little more relaxed in this neighborhood. You'll get used to it." Mia didn't respond. She turned and walked back to her house, her frustration mounting. It wasn't just Karen's dismissive attitude, it was the audacity of it all. Karen knew she was in the wrong, but acted as if Mia was the unreasonable one for expecting basic respect. 15 minutes later, the cars began to move, one by one. Mia watched from her window as the last vehicle backed out, its tires skidding slightly and tearing up more of the grass near the edge of the driveway. When the dust settled, she stepped outside to survey the damage. The grooves in the lawn were deep, the grass trampled beyond repair in some spots. She snapped a few photos with her phone, making a mental note to file a complaint if this happened again. The next day, Mia decided to take proactive steps. She went through her property deed to ensure there was no ambiguity about the driveway's ownership. The document clearly stated that the driveway was part of her private property, with no shared access rights. Satisfied that her claim was indisputable, she printed a copy to have on hand in case Karen decided to argue otherwise. To reinforce her boundaries, Mia purchased new signs online, larger and sturdier than the last ones. They clearly read, "Private property, no parking," in bold, reflective letters. Once they arrived, she installed them herself, placing them prominently at both the entrance to the driveway and midway up its length. This time she secured them with heavy-duty stakes to make sure they couldn't be easily removed. For a short while, the signs seemed to work. The driveway remained clear, and Mia started to feel hopeful that the issue had finally been resolved. But that hope was short-lived. One evening, as she was cleaning up her studio, she heard a strange sound from outside, a low, metallic clatter, followed by what sounded like muffled laughter. She froze for a moment, her heart racing, before grabbing her phone and heading to the front door. When she stepped outside, she found one of her new signs lying face down on the ground, its stake bent and twisted. The other sign was gone entirely, nowhere to be seen. The tire tracks on the driveway suggested that someone had run over the signs deliberately before driving away. Mia's anger flared. She knew this wasn't a coincidence. Someone was sending a message, and it wasn't hard to guess who. The next morning, Mia marched over to Karen's house and rang the doorbell. This time, Karen didn't answer. Mia waited, her jaw clenched, then rang again. Still nothing. Frustrated, she walked back to her house and decided to call the non-emergency police line to report the vandalism. She explained the situation to the officer on the phone, detailing the repeated parking violations and the destruction of her property. The officer was sympathetic but non-committal, saying they would file the report but couldn't do much without evidence of who had done it. Feeling both powerless and determined, Mia decided to escalate her response. She ordered a set of security cameras and motion sensor lights for her driveway. If someone tried to pull another stunt, she'd have proof. She spent the weekend installing the equipment, making sure every angle of the driveway was covered. That same weekend, as if on cue, Karen escalated as well. On Sunday afternoon, Mia stepped outside to water her plants and found a new note taped to her mailbox. The handwriting was large and bold, written in thick black marker. "This driveway isn't just yours. Stop being selfish." Mia stared at the note, her hands trembling. The arrogance, the sheer entitlement, it was infuriating. She took a photo of the note and added it to the growing folder of evidence she was compiling on her phone. It was clear now that this wasn't just about parking. This was about control, about Karen asserting dominance over something that didn't belong to her. Mia felt a surge of resolve. Karen might be trying to intimidate her, but Mia wasn't the kind of person to back down from a fight. If Karen wanted a war, she was going to get one. Mia's frustration with Karen had reached its peak. The defaced signs, the entitled notes, and the repeated violations of her property were no longer just inconveniences, they felt like direct challenges to her authority and ownership. But Mia wasn't about to let herself be pushed around. She was determined to regain control, no matter how persistent Karen proved to be. After installing the security cameras, Mia began reviewing the footage every morning. For a few days, everything seemed quiet. The driveway was clear, and there were no signs of Karen or her guests trespassing. Mia almost started to believe that the cameras and motion sensor lights had scared her off. But then, late one night, the cameras captured something that reignited Mia's fury. At 2 a.m., headlights appeared at the edge of the driveway. A car rolled up slowly, its engine humming softly in the still night. From the footage, Mia could see a woman stepping out of the vehicle, her face partially obscured by the shadows. She bent down near one of the newly installed motion sensor lights, fiddled with it for a moment, and then smashed it with a blunt object before driving off. The footage wasn't perfectly clear, but Mia recognized the shape of the car. It was Karen's. Mia filed another report with the police the following morning, providing the footage as evidence. The officer she spoke with assured her they would investigate, but Mia knew their response would be slow. She decided to handle the situation in her own way while she waited for the system to catch up. Determined to escalate her defenses, Mia contacted a contractor to install a series of decorative but functional bollards along the edge of her driveway. These stone pillars were heavy, unmovable without specialized equipment, and designed to prevent anyone from driving onto the grass or the driveway itself. They also added an aesthetic touch, which Mia hoped would give her home an even more personal feel. When the bollards were installed a week later, Mia felt a wave of relief. For the first time since moving in, she believed she had finally created a barrier that Karen couldn't so easily cross. But Karen, as always, found a way to retaliate. One afternoon, as Mia worked in her studio, she heard a loud banging sound coming from the direction of her driveway. She rushed outside to find two of the bollards toppled over, their bases cracked as if someone had used significant force to knock them down. Shards of stone littered the ground, and deep tire marks were gouged into the grass next to the driveway. Mia looked around, hoping to catch Karen in the act, but the street was empty. The damage, however, spoke volumes. She snapped photos and called the contractor to come out for repairs, but as she stood there, staring at the destruction, a car pulled up in front of Karen's house. It was a delivery truck. The driver stepped out and began unloading building materials, wooden planks, buckets of paint, and heavy tools. Mia approached the truck driver, curiosity overcoming her caution. "Excuse me," she called out, pointing toward Karen's house. "Is this delivery for her?" The man nodded. "Yeah, she's doing some kind of project in her backyard. She mentioned something about making space for extra cars." Mia's stomach dropped. Karen wasn't just being difficult, she was preparing for something bigger. Mia could feel it. She thanked the driver and returned to her house, her mind racing. Why would Karen need extra space unless she was planning to increase the number of guests using Mia's property? The thought made her blood boil. The next day, Mia woke up to an even bigger shock. Her cameras captured Karen and two other people, likely her guests, standing at the edge of Mia's property late at night. They were holding tools: a crowbar, a shovel, and what looked like a mallet. The footage showed them dismantling the remaining bollards one by one and dumping the broken pieces into the woods nearby. Mia's stomach twisted in anger and disbelief. Instead of confronting Karen directly, Mia took the footage to her lawyer. She explained the escalating situation, from the repeated trespassing to the vandalism and threats. Her lawyer, a calm but assertive woman named Rebecca, reviewed the evidence carefully. "This isn't just about property violations anymore," Rebecca said, her tone serious. "This is harassment. You have enough here to pursue legal action. At the very least, we can file for a restraining order to keep her off your property." Mia agreed. Together, they drafted the paperwork and submitted it to the local court. Rebecca assured Mia that once the restraining order was approved, any future incidents could result in immediate legal consequences for Karen. But Karen seemed to sense the shift in Mia's approach. The night after the restraining order was filed, Mia came home to find her driveway completely blocked by 3 large garbage cans. Inside them were bricks and heavy stones, making them impossible to move without significant effort. A note was taped to one of the cans, written in Karen's bold handwriting: "Your driveway is still just a driveway. Stop making it a war zone." Mia didn't hesitate. She called the police and reported the obstruction. This time, when the officers arrived, she showed them the restraining order and the footage from her cameras. The officers were sympathetic and agreed to speak with Karen directly. After an hour of back and forth, Karen reluctantly came out of her house and removed the garbage cans herself, glaring at Mia the entire time. "I don't know what you think you're accomplishing," Karen hissed as she dragged the last can away. "You're making yourself look crazy, not me." Mia didn't respond. She simply stood her ground, watching as Karen retreated back into her house. But the encounter left her shaken. Karen's hostility was becoming more overt, and Mia couldn't shake the feeling that things would get worse before they got better. The next morning, Mia woke up to find her mailbox vandalized. The flag was torn off, and the box itself was bent at an odd angle, as if someone had hit it with a bat. Inside, there was another note: "You can't win." Mia's hands shook as she read the note. It wasn't fear, it was fury. Karen wasn't just crossing boundaries anymore, she was openly taunting her. Mia decided she couldn't wait for the restraining order to take effect. She needed to take even stronger measures to protect her home and her sanity. That evening, she contacted a security company and arranged for additional surveillance equipment. including motion-activated floodlights and alarms. She also decided to bring in a landscaping crew to build a reinforced fence along the perimeter of her property. If Karen wanted to keep pushing, Mia was going to make it as difficult as humanly possible. As the sun set, Mia sat on her porch, staring out at the driveway. The damage to the bollards had been repaired, and the garbage cans were gone, but the tension in the air was palpable. Karen's house was quiet, but Mia knew better than to trust the silence. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, but Mia wasn't backing down. If Karen thought she could intimidate her into submission, she was in for a rude awakening. Mia's decision to take control of the situation by filing for a restraining order and reinforcing her property defenses gave her a temporary sense of relief. The broken bollards had been replaced, the new cameras and motion-activated lights were installed, and the landscaping crew had begun work on a sturdy fence that would act as a physical boundary against any further trespassing. Still, the tension with Karen lingered, like a storm cloud refusing to clear. Mia tried to focus on her art, pouring her frustration into her sketches, but the stress made it difficult to concentrate. Every creak of a floorboard or rustle outside her window sent her heart racing. Days passed without any incidents, and Mia began to hope that the restraining order and her decisive actions had finally discouraged Karen from pushing further. The quiet was unsettling, but she tried to appreciate the calm and convince herself that the worst was over. Then came the letter. It arrived in an unmarked envelope, tucked neatly into Mia's mailbox alongside her usual bills and flyers. At first, she thought it might be an official notice about the restraining order, but as she opened it, her stomach churned. The letter was handwritten in the same bold, aggressive style as the notes she had received before. Your little restraining order won't stop me. This neighborhood doesn't belong to you, and neither does that driveway. Don't think I'm giving up that easily. Mia stared at the letter, her hands trembling with anger and disbelief. Karen had always been bold, but this felt like a direct threat, a refusal to back down despite the legal boundaries now in place. Mia took a photo of the letter and forwarded it to her lawyer, Rebecca, who immediately contacted the police. The officers who responded seemed more serious this time, taking a copy of the letter and promising to investigate further. But Mia knew better than to rely solely on the authorities. Karen had made it clear that she wasn't afraid of crossing legal lines, and Mia couldn't afford to let her guard down. That evening, she reviewed the footage from her cameras, checking for any signs of unusual activity. Sure enough, there it was, grainy but unmistakable footage of Karen walking down the driveway late at night, holding what looked like a piece of paper. She paused near the mailbox, shoved the letter inside, and then casually strolled back toward her house. Mia forwarded the footage to Rebecca, who assured her that this was solid evidence of Karen violating the restraining order. The legal process, however, would take time, and Mia was growing increasingly frustrated with how slow things were moving. It felt as though every step forward was met with another act of defiance from Karen, as if she thrived on the conflict. The next morning, as the landscaping crew continued work on the fence, Mia decided to speak to some of the neighbors. She hadn't interacted much with them since moving in, partly because of her introverted nature and partly because of the ongoing drama with Karen. But now she felt it was important to get a sense of where the other residents stood. She started with the elderly couple who lived across the street, a kind-looking pair named Mr. and Mrs. Alvarez. When Mia explained what had been happening, they nodded sympathetically. You're not the first one she's done this to, Mrs. Alvarez said, her voice tinged with exasperation. Karen's been causing problems for years. She's always looking for ways to push her neighbors around. Mr. Alvarez chimed in. She tried something similar with us a few years ago, saying our garden fence was too close to the sidewalk. We ignored her, but she eventually called the city to complain. They didn't do anything about it, of course, but she kept harassing us for months. Hearing their stories gave Mia a mix of relief and frustration. On one hand, she felt validated this wasn't just about her, and Karen's behavior was clearly part of a larger pattern. On the other hand, it was infuriating to realize that Karen had been allowed to bully her neighbors for so long without facing any real consequences. As she made her way back to her house, Mia noticed a few other neighbors watching her from their porches or windows. Some offered polite nods or half smiles, while others quickly looked away. It was clear that Karen had a reputation, but not everyone was willing to speak out against her. Later that evening, Rebecca called with an update. "The restraining order violation is being processed," she said, her tone measured. "But Karen's behavior suggests she's not going to stop unless we take more aggressive action. I think it's time we file a civil lawsuit for harassment and property damage. It'll send a clear message that her actions have real consequences." Mia hesitated. A lawsuit would be a significant escalation, not to mention a costly and time-consuming process. But as she glanced out the window at the fence construction, she realized she didn't have much choice. Karen wasn't going to stop until she was forced to, and Mia couldn't keep living in a constant state of stress and vigilance. "Let's do it," Mia said firmly. "I'm not letting her win." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal preparation. Rebecca worked tirelessly to gather evidence, compiling the security footage, photos of the damage, and records of the police reports. Meanwhile, Mia focused on strengthening her case by documenting every interaction she had with Karen, no matter how small. Karen, of course, continued to push boundaries. One night, Mia heard a loud crash outside and rushed to her window, only to find that someone had knocked over the new bollards yet again. This time, however, the cameras captured everything clear footage of Karen and two of her guests smashing the bollards with a sledgehammer. When the police arrived, they finally had enough evidence to take immediate action. Karen was issued a citation for vandalism and ordered to pay for the damages. It wasn't the full-scale resolution Mia was hoping for, but it was a step in the right direction. Despite the small victory, Karen's hostility didn't waver. She began spreading rumors about Mia throughout the neighborhood, claiming that she was anti-community and trying to ruin the friendly spirit of the area. Some neighbors seemed to believe her, while others stayed neutral, unwilling to get involved. The tension reached a boiling point when Karen showed up at the neighborhood association meeting and attempted to accuse Mia of violating community regulations by installing the fence and cameras without proper approval. Mia, who had anticipated this move, arrived at the meeting with Rebecca by her side. Together, they presented clear documentation proving that everything Mia had done was within her legal rights as a property owner. As Karen's arguments crumbled under the weight of the evidence, Mia noticed a shift in the room. Some neighbors who had remained silent before began to speak up, sharing their own grievances with Karen's behavior. For the first time, Mia felt the tide turning in her favor. By the end of the meeting, Karen was left seething, her usual smugness replaced by barely concealed rage. Mia, meanwhile, felt a newfound sense of strength and solidarity. She wasn't alone in this fight anymore, and with Rebecca's guidance and the support of her neighbors, she was determined to see it through to the end. That night, as Mia sat on her porch, she allowed herself a moment of calm. The fence was almost complete, the cameras were working perfectly, and the lawsuit was moving forward. Karen might have been relentless, but Mia was proving to be just as determined. This wasn't just about a driveway anymore, it was about standing up for her rights and refusing to be intimidated. And for the first time since moving in, Mia felt like she was truly in control. Mia had thought the neighborhood meeting would mark a turning point, and in some ways it did. For the first time, she had seen Karen's control over the community crack, and she felt a glimmer of hope as neighbors began to voice their frustrations about Karen's behavior. But Karen wasn't the type to back down gracefully. If anything, the public humiliation seemed to harden her resolve, and it didn't take long for her to strike back. The first sign came only a few days later. Mia woke up to find that someone had dumped a large pile of gravel right at the entrance to her driveway, completely blocking it. She stood there in stunned silence, staring at the mound of rocks, her mind racing. It wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a deliberate act of sabotage. There was no note, no explanation, but Mia didn't need one. She knew exactly who was behind it. Taking a deep breath to calm her rising anger, Mia immediately called Rebecca, her lawyer, to report the incident. "This is escalation," Rebecca said firmly. "We'll add it to the lawsuit as another example of harassment and interference with your property rights. Take photos of everything and get a contractor to clear it. Don't let her intimidate you." Mia followed Rebecca's advice, documenting the scene from every angle before contacting a local company to remove the gravel. The workers arrived later that afternoon and made quick work of clearing the driveway, but the incident left Mia shaken. Karen wasn't just making petty gestures anymore, she was actively trying to disrupt Mia's ability to live her life. Over the next week, the pattern of escalation continued. One evening, Mia returned home from running errands to find that her trash bins had been overturned, their contents scattered across her front yard. Another morning, she discovered deep scratches along the side of her car, as if someone had dragged a key or sharp object across the paint. The security cameras captured shadowy figures near her property on both occasions, but their faces were obscured, and the footage wasn't clear enough to positively identify Karen or her guests. Mia's frustration and stress were reaching a breaking point. She spent hours reviewing footage, documenting the damage, and communicating with Rebecca and the police. Despite her meticulous records, progress was slow. Karen had grown more cautious, ensuring that nothing she did could be easily traced back to her. Then came the most blatant provocation yet. One night, as Mia was preparing for bed, she heard loud voices and the unmistakable rumble of an engine outside. She rushed to her window and saw a group of people gathered in her driveway, laughing and talking as if they owned the place. A large pickup truck was parked in the middle of the driveway, its headlights illuminating the group. Mia grabbed her phone and started recording the scene through the window. She could see Karen among them, gesturing animatedly and pointing toward Mia's house. The sight made her blood boil. This wasn't just a group of rowdy guests, it was a deliberate show of defiance. Without hesitation, Mia called the police. When the officers arrived, the group quickly dispersed, some of them laughing and jeering as they climbed into their vehicles and drove away. Karen, of course, stayed behind, feigning innocence as the officers questioned her. "They're just friends visiting," Karen said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "I didn't realize they'd parked on her driveway. It won't happen again." The officers gave Karen a warning, but Mia could see the smug look on her face as they walked back to their patrol car. It was infuriating. Karen wasn't taking any of this seriously, and the lack of immediate consequences only seemed to embolden her. The next day, Mia received a letter from the local zoning office. It was a formal notice claiming that her newly installed fence might be in violation of property regulations and requesting that she provide documentation proving its compliance. The timing was too coincidental to ignore. Mia immediately suspected that Karen had filed a complaint in retaliation for the police visit. Rebecca confirmed her suspicions when she reviewed the letter. "This is a common tactic in cases like yours," she explained. "She's trying to tie you up in red tape and create more stress for you. Don't worry, we'll handle it. Your fence is fully compliant and will provide the necessary documents." Mia felt a wave of gratitude for Rebecca's calm, methodical approach, but the stress was beginning to take its toll. She found herself waking up in the middle of the night, heart racing, every creak of the house making her wonder if Karen was outside, plotting her next move. Determined not to let Karen's tactics derail her life, Mia decided to take further action. She contacted the same contractor who had installed her fence and arranged to have a steel gate added to the entrance of her driveway. The gate would be equipped with a keypad for access and reinforced to prevent tampering. It was an expensive addition, but Mia saw it as a necessary investment in her peace of mind. When the gate was installed a week later, Mia felt a renewed sense of security. The sleek, modern design complemented her property, and the keypad ensured that no one could enter without her permission. But the victory was short-lived. 2 nights after the gate was installed, Mia was woken by the blaring sound of her security alarm. She bolted out of bed, her heart pounding, and checked the live feed from her cameras. The footage showed a shadowy figure near the gate, holding what looked like a crowbar. They were attempting to pry open the gate, but the alarm had clearly startled them. After a few seconds, the figure dropped the tool and ran off into the night. Mia called the police, who arrived within minutes. They inspected the gate and found minor damage, but nothing that compromised its functionality. The officers assured Mia that they would patrol the area more frequently, but Mia couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. Karen was becoming more desperate, and Mia feared what she might do next. The next morning, Mia received another letter, this time from Karen's lawyer. The letter accused Mia of intentionally creating a hostile environment and demanded that she remove the gate, claiming it was obstructing access to shared community spaces. The absurdity of the claim made Mia laugh bitterly. There were no shared spaces. The driveway and gate were entirely on her property, as clearly outlined in her deed. Rebecca was unfazed by the letter. "This is just another empty threat," she said. "She's trying to intimidate you into backing down. We'll respond formally, but there's no legal basis for her claim." Despite Rebecca's reassurances, the constant back and forth was wearing Mia down. Karen's behavior had gone from irritating to outright menacing, and Mia felt like she was fighting a war on multiple fronts. But she refused to give in. That evening, as she sat on her porch, watching the sun set over her newly secured property, Mia made a promise to herself. Karen might think she could bully her into submission, but Mia wasn't going anywhere. She had come to this neighborhood to find peace, and she was determined to claim it no matter what it took. The tension between Mia and Karen had reached an unbearable peak. Every act of sabotage, every veiled threat, and every brazen confrontation had brought them closer to an inevitable clash. Mia felt like she was walking a razor's edge, but she wasn't alone anymore. Rebecca was steadfast in her legal support, and a handful of neighbors, those who had also suffered under Karen's relentless bullying, had quietly rallied behind Mia. It was a small but meaningful show of solidarity, and it gave her the strength to push forward. The lawsuit for harassment and property damage was moving through the courts, but Karen wasn't waiting for the outcome. She ramped up her provocations, targeting Mia's new gate. One morning, Mia found it vandalized, deep scratches marred the metal surface, and someone had spray-painted the words, "This isn't yours," across it in bright red. Her security cameras caught two masked figures committing the act, one of whom bore an unmistakable resemblance to Karen's posture and mannerisms. Mia reported the incident to the police and sent the footage to Rebecca, who immediately filed an emergency motion with the court. Rebecca's voice on the phone was calm but firm. "This is the evidence we need to turn the tide. She's shown a complete disregard for the restraining order and the law. It's time to hold her accountable." Days later, Rebecca called with good news. The court had granted a preliminary hearing to address the restraining order violations and escalate the case. Karen was summoned to appear, and Mia felt a flicker of hope that at last her tormentor would face consequences. The hearing day arrived, and Mia sat in the courtroom, her nerves tightly wound. Karen entered with a lawyer, a tall man in a slick suit, whose smug expression mirrored Karen's own. As the proceedings began, Rebecca presented a mountain of evidence: the security footage of Karen and her guests trespassing, the damaged property, the threatening notes, and the vandalized gate. Each piece was meticulously laid out, painting a damning picture of Karen's campaign of harassment. Karen's lawyer tried to argue that the incidents were misunderstandings or unrelated to his client. He claimed the notes couldn't be definitively tied to Karen and that the footage was inconclusive. But Rebecca anticipated every defense, countering with hard facts and documentation. She even brought in one of the neighbors, Mrs. Alvarez, as a witness. The elderly woman testified about Karen's history of bullying others in the community, further undermining her credibility. Karen, visibly irritated, tried to speak out of turn multiple times, her mask of composure slipping with every damning point Rebecca made. By the time the judge reviewed the footage of the masked figures vandalizing the gate, one of whom clearly matched Karen's build and gait, it was clear where the case was heading. The judge delivered a stern rebuke. "This is not just a pattern of property disputes, it's a deliberate, malicious campaign to intimidate and harass. The restraining order violations alone are grounds for legal consequences, and the evidence of vandalism makes this even more egregious." Karen's lawyer tried to mitigate the damage, suggesting mediation or a settlement, but the judge wasn't swayed. He ruled in Mia's favor, ordering Karen to pay restitution for the damage to the gate and bollards, cover Mia's legal fees, and adhere strictly to the restraining order. Any further violations, the judge warned, would result in criminal charges. As the verdict was read, Karen's expression hardened, her lips pressing into a thin, angry line. Mia felt a wave of relief wash over her, but it was tempered by the knowledge that Karen wouldn't take this defeat lightly. That evening, Mia returned home to find a bouquet of wilted flowers left at her gate with a note attached. It read, "You might have won this time, but I'm not finished." It was Karen's final petty act of defiance, but it didn't shake Mia's resolve. For the first time in months, Mia felt like she had regained control of her life. Karen's threats no longer held the same power over her. The legal victory, though exhausting, was a reminder that standing up for herself was worth every moment of struggle. Mia spent the next few days reinforcing her gate and finalizing her landscaping. She had the graffiti removed, added fresh coats of paint, and planted new flowers to replace the ones that had been trampled during Karen's earlier trespasses. Each small act felt like reclaiming her space, piece by piece. Though Karen remained in the neighborhood, her behavior noticeably changed. The lawsuit and court ruling had left her socially isolated. Even the neighbors who had once tolerated her antics began to distance themselves. The quiet satisfaction of seeing Karen's influence wane was a victory in itself. Mia knew the conflict had taken a toll on her, but it had also shown her strength she didn't know she had. Her driveway, once a battleground, was now a symbol of her resilience. The gate stood tall and unyielding, a reminder to anyone who approached that this was her home, her sanctuary, and she would fight to protect it. In the weeks following the court's decision, a calm began to settle over Mia's life. For the first time since moving into her new home, she felt a sense of security and control. The gate, now fully repaired and freshly painted, stood as a symbol of her victory. The bollards lining her driveway were sturdier than ever, and the garden she had lovingly tended was blooming again, erasing the damage Karen had caused. Each time Mia looked out at her property, she felt a swell of pride. Karen, however, was noticeably subdued. Her once frequent gatherings and late-night visitors stopped entirely. Neighbors who had once whispered about Karen's domineering behavior began openly avoiding her. Mia heard from Mrs. Alvarez that Karen had tried to gather support to appeal the court's decision, but no one wanted to be involved with her anymore. The social isolation seemed to wear on Karen, but she maintained her aloofness, walking stiffly to her car or glaring across the street at Mia's house. One sunny Saturday morning, Mia decided to host a small gathering of her own. She invited the Alvarezes, a few neighbors who had supported her during the ordeal, and Rebecca, her lawyer. It wasn't just a celebration of her victory, it was also a way to reintroduce herself to the community as more than just the new neighbor at odds with Karen. The event was simple but heartfelt. Mia set up a table on her porch with homemade snacks, fresh lemonade, and coffee. Guests arrived one by one, offering warm smiles and words of encouragement. "You really handled yourself well," Mrs. Alvarez said, squeezing Mia's hand. "Karen's been a problem for years, but no one else stood up to her the way you did." Rebecca chimed in, raising her glass of lemonade. "Not only did you stand up to her, but you set a precedent. People like Karen thrive on intimidation until someone shows them they can't get away with it." Mia felt a wave of gratitude as she looked around at her small but supportive group of neighbors. It wasn't just about winning a legal battle, it was about building a home where she felt connected and respected. As the sun set and the gathering wound down, Mia walked her guests to their cars. The street was quiet, the air cool and still. When the last guest had left, Mia stood at the edge of her driveway, taking in the peaceful scene. Her home looked as it had the first time she saw it, a safe haven, full of potential and promise. A few days later, a for sale sign appeared in Karen's yard. Mia wasn't surprised. The lawsuit and the damage to her reputation had clearly taken their toll. Though they hadn't spoken since the court hearing, Mia could feel Karen's animosity every time they crossed paths. Now it seemed Karen had finally decided to leave. As the weeks passed and the sign remained, Mia noticed fewer lights on in Karen's house and fewer cars in the driveway. One evening, she saw a moving truck pull up, and by the next morning the house was empty. Karen had gone without a word. Mia stood at her kitchen window, watching the truck disappear down the street. She didn't feel triumph or glee, just relief. The chapter was finally closed. With Karen gone, the neighborhood seemed to breathe easier. Neighbors who had been wary of the tension began chatting with Mia more often, and the lingering discomfort that Karen had left in her wake started to fade. Mia used the newfound peace to focus on her art, completing the series of sculptures she had envisioned when she first moved in. The driveway, once a battleground, became a showcase for her work. Mia installed her finished sculptures along its length, each piece representing a different aspect of her journey: resilience, determination, and the quiet strength she had discovered within herself. The neighbors loved it, and several even asked if she would consider displaying more of her art in other parts of the community. As Mia sat on her porch one evening, sipping tea and looking out at her driveway, she felt a deep sense of contentment. The battle with Karen had been draining, but it had also reminded her of who she was: someone who wouldn't back down, someone who could fight for what mattered. This was her home now, in every sense of the word, and no one would ever take that from her again.